November 11th, Remembrance Day. We all sort of understand what Remembrance Day is. It's a day to commemorate and give thanks to those who have given their lives in service to our country and the free world we live in. We know to wear our poppies on our left lapel, we know there's a moment of silence, and we know to give our thanks and respect to veterans and soldiers. But if you're in a place like Prince George or northern BC, it can feel sort of far away. Something so long ago and such a great distance away. Today we're going to hear from a pillar of the Prince George community, someone whose story might help bring the experience of the war a bit closer to us here in Prince George and tell us why we remember. Today we're going to spend a few minutes hearing from A Brink and his important story of how the war affected his life in the 1940s war-torn Holland and ultimately his decision to move to Canada and chase a dream.
Hello, everybody. My name is A Brink. I'm speaking to you from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, and in the background you see the city of Prince George, actually, and I've been in Prince George for 55 years. I arrived here about a block away from here on the Greyhound bus in July 1965, actually, with $25.47. Couldn't speak the language, and in the hopes of building a mill. I was born in Holland, in northern Holland, northeastern Holland, in fact, on November the 1st, 1940. It is now November, and November in particular is important to all of us because part of November is Remembrance Day. And Remembrance Day in particular, I want to talk to everybody about what it really means and what it means to me and to us collectively. Remembrance Day remembers the war, the First World War, in fact, and it is on the 11th year, on the 11th month, in the 11th day, at the 11th hour, that peace was reached in the war. I remember the war, the Second World War in particular, as I was born in northeastern Holland. I want to kind of take you with me to the northeastern part of Holland. It is, Holland by and large is a relatively small country. In the northeastern part in particular, there is a lot of farming. And for my family in 1938, my mom and dad were just recently married and were expecting their first child. And then everything was fine, and they were doing well and were preparing for their futures and dreaming of all the things that young people dream about, careers and building a home and all the other things around it. Then the world changed. And what happened in April of 1940, Holland was invaded by the German forces.
It was about dawn this morning that the first reports came in saying that German troops were crossing the frontier into Denmark. At the same time, attacks were being delivered from the sea on a number of Norway's.
My dad already had been called up by the Dutch army to serve in the army. This was when the invasion happened, April, but he already had been called up in the service in February of 1940. We still didn't imagine really that war would break out, but it happened all very, very quickly on May the 10th, 1940, and the war was overwhelming. A mass of invading forces came in and changed our world. It would be a changer for not only our family, but everything around us. My dad was called into defending Rotterdam as a city and was stationed in Rotterdam. And then in early May 1940, when the Germans were trying to have Holland give in to the forces, Rotterdam was bombed. and it destroyed most of the downtown of Rotterdam. It would be the last time that my mom, and by then two of her children, would hear about my dad, where he had been. It would take 5 years before we would know if he had survived the war. The war years were extremely difficult. Everything had changed. All of a sudden, there were all the things that we expect to be normal, as we do here, going to the store and doing all the things that we do as individuals were different. There were no more stores to go to. Most of the things were closed. There was little or no food available, and everybody had somehow fend for themselves. I remember as a child, what I would remember is that warplanes would be overhead in the skies, not only daytime, but also nighttime bombing. And in the path where we lived overnight, sometimes up to 300 airplanes would be in the air. The sound of the airplanes is a sound that you will never, ever forget. It was then, during the winter of 1944, that was also known as the Hunger Winter. It was a time where virtually there was no food. The German forces tried to stop any food coming in, and things were extremely difficult. The liberating forces, in particular in the area where we lived, and in Holland in particular, were mainly the Canadian forces that had landed with the other liberating forces in Normandy and made their way through Holland in September of 1944. And what I still remember as a child, what we did, my brother, my sister, and me being 5 years old, my sister 6, and my brother 7, we would every morning go out, take gunny sacks, go in particular to the railroad tracks, and find anything that we could either burn or eat and bring it back home again. I remember being at home with my mom and the 3 little kids, sitting in a small little room and trying to keep it warm while things were cold. I remember even now still, that what feelings in particular did I have, it's always been the same. It was hunger, anxiety, and then it was cold. Always cold. In April of 1945, in particular April the 12th, 1945, the little town where we lived in northeastern Holland, a town called Sappemeer, S-A-P-P-E-M-E-E-R, and for somebody that wants to look it up, the liberating Canadian forces had now worked their way through most of the Holland and were now ending in the extreme northeastern part just before they reached Germany.
Last hours of control in northern Holland, a spirit of wild fiesta reigns in towns and villages freed by the Canadian drive. Behind are the grim years of famine and oppression. The bands play and the people welcome the dawn of a free new day. Old Dutch veterans of colonial wars parade to celebrate liberation. The Dutch standard is again raised over what was the palace of a British monarch of the House of Orange, King William III. Hollanders hail the harbingers of freedom as town after town is emancipated. Proclamations are read and posted, announcing the resumption of normal government. The years of slavery for a peace-loving people have reached their termination.
It were those forces that liberated us, those Canadians that liberated us on April the 12th, 1945. When the liberating forces came through our town, right behind our house was a schoolyard where a small section of the Canadian Red Cross was stationed. And we would go there every morning because they fed us bread with butter and with cheese, and the cheese and the butter was bigger than the bread. Everybody was called Johnny, and we really didn't understand it, but really we did. So it was that period in particular that it made such an impression on me that I knew from that point forward, even being only 5 years old, that when I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes and live in Canada. That really never left me, and it was not until I was 24 that I was able to go and landed here in fact in Prince George. Now, my presentation to you is also about dreams and all the adversary things that may have happened in the difficult periods. There were also dreams and things that I aspired to as a little boy as a result of the war. The one was going to Canada, the other one to build my own lumber company in Canada. And I was able to do both of that when I landed here in 1965 and started from nothing really and gradually build up my companies. The reason that I believe all of this is so important to share with you is because not too long from now or right now, we have November the 11th, which is a time that we remember, and we call it Remembrance Day, and we have 2 minutes of silence. Why? To remember those, that gave the ultimate price. And not far from here where I'm sitting is City Hall, and again, a lot of people from Prince George get together, as they do in other communities, to remember. I want, in particular, the young people that will be listening to my presentation to kind of put into context as to why this is so important and how quickly things can change. So all the things, I was no different, that we take for granted may change overnight. To appreciate all of that is why we remember the 2 minutes, and we remember in particular all those that that made the sacrifice. Another part about it is interesting because some of these things happen with all the difficulties going on during war, is that, and again coming back to the time that I first interacted with the Canadian forces right behind our house in Prince George who fed us, it would be in 1967, nearly 22 years after the liberation of my little town, that I was invited to a Prince George family for dinner, first time ever, because I was new to the country, and that as we were sitting for dinner, I started talking to the people that hosted me, and we started talking about Holland, and the husband, a fellow by the name of Jerry Wilmot, was saying, he was in Holland. In fact, he was in the Canadian Army, and by the time we finished our conversation, he was the captain in the schoolyard right behind our house. Coincidence? Maybe. The other interesting part about it is that today, when one of my dreams, built my own lumber company here in Prince George, not more than half a kilometer away from here, on a location called River Road. There was a mill there before, and the mill that was located precisely at the location I was located was called Norman M. Smith. Up to 1964, the lumber mill was owned by Captain Jerry Wilmot. Coincidence? Maybe. So the message I want to leave everybody with: appreciate what you have, pursue your dreams, but also look back and do not take it for granted. And on the 11th, remember